The morning sun hadn't yet peeked through the towering buildings of downtown Seattle when Maria settled into her usual spot near the busy intersection. Her weathered guitar case lay open at her feet, its velvet lining faded from years of use, containing only a few scattered coins from yesterday's performance. The early December air bit at her fingers as she pulled her old acoustic guitar from its case, the instrument showing signs of wear, but still producing the warm, rich tones that had been her companion through countless performances. Her little girl, Lily, already knew the morning routine. The 6-year-old carefully spread out her second-hand coloring books on a flattened cardboard box, her small backpack serving as both a seat cushion and storage for their few remaining possessions. Despite their circumstances, Lily's bright eyes and gentle smile remained unchanged, a constant reminder of why Maria kept pushing forward. "Ready for another day of music, sweetie?" Maria asked, adjusting her guitar strap. Lily nodded enthusiastically, already humming along to the tune she knew her mother would start with. It was their special song, one Maria had written during their first week on the streets, a melody that spoke of hope and better days ahead. The morning crowd began to build as office workers hurried past, their coffee cups steaming in the cold air. Some barely glanced their way, while others would slow down just enough to toss a few coins or a dollar bill into the guitar case. Maria had learned to read the crowd over the past 8 months, the hurried steps of Monday mornings, the slightly more generous spirits of Friday afternoons, and the occasional kind soul who would stop to actually listen. A gentle breeze carried the aroma of fresh bread from the nearby bakery, making both their stomachs growl. They had managed to save $2 from yesterday's earnings for Lily's milk, but Maria had skipped dinner herself. Still, her voice remained strong and clear as she began to sing, her fingers finding the familiar chords almost automatically. As the morning progressed, Maria wove together a tapestry of songs, some popular tunes that pedestrians would recognize, mixed with her own compositions that told stories of love, loss, and perseverance. Her voice carried through the urban canyon, somehow rising above the symphony of traffic, construction, and city life. Between songs, she would check on Lily, who had developed a small but loyal audience of her own. A kind-hearted barista from the coffee shop across the street would sometimes sneak her hot chocolate, and an elderly gentleman who walked his dog every morning would bring her drawings to color. These small acts of kindness helped maintain their dignity in a situation that threatened to strip it away daily. Maria's story wasn't the one she had imagined for herself. Just a year ago, she had been teaching music at a local elementary school, living in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment with her husband and daughter. Then came the accident that took her husband, followed by mounting medical bills, and finally the eviction notice they couldn't fight. The system that was supposed to help had too many gaps, and they had slipped through every one of them. Yet here she stood, her music transforming their corner into something more than just another spot where the homeless gathered. Regular passers-by had begun to recognize them, some stopping to chat or bring small necessities. A young office worker named John would often pause to listen during his lunch break, sometimes sharing his sandwich with Lily. An elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Kim regularly brought them warm soup from her family's restaurant. As the morning rush began to slow, Maria noticed Lily working intently on her math homework. Despite their circumstances, she had insisted on keeping up with her studies, borrowing books from the public library, and working through problems during breaks between songs. Maria's heart swelled with pride and ached with guilt simultaneously. Her daughter shouldn't have to be this strong, this resilient at such a young age. The sun had finally risen high enough to warm their corner slightly when Maria began one of her most powerful songs. Her fingers moved across the guitar strings with practiced precision as she closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her. This wasn't just performing anymore, it was storytelling, healing, surviving. Each note carried their journey, their struggles, their hopes for a better tomorrow. People often asked why she chose this particular corner. The truth was, it chose her. The acoustics were perfect. The building walls created a natural amphitheater that carried her voice just far enough. The morning sun provided warmth without being harsh, and the steady stream of pedestrians offered enough potential for daily earnings to keep them fed, if not comfortable. A group of construction workers on their break had gathered nearby, some nodding along to her music while eating their lunches. One of them, a weather-worn man with kind eyes, had been leaving his extra sandwich for Lily every day this week. These small gestures of humanity kept their spirits alive, reminding them that even in their darkest moments, they weren't completely alone. As Maria finished another song, she watched Lily greeting the regulars who had become their unofficial family. Despite everything they had lost, they had found something unexpected on this corner, a community. It wasn't the life they wanted, but they faced each day with determination, their music creating a bridge between their world and the bustling city life that flowed around them. The morning was just another page in their ongoing story, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Maybe it was the way the wind carried her voice a little further today, or how the sunshine seemed a bit warmer than usual. Whatever it was, she kept singing, her voice carrying their hopes high above the city streets, waiting for someone to really hear it. Winter had tightened its grip on the city, bringing with it the kind of bone-chilling cold that no amount of layered clothing could fully ward off. Maria's fingers felt stiff and clumsy as she tried to tune her guitar, the metal strings biting into her skin like tiny needles of ice. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid morning air as she hummed softly, trying to warm up her vocal cords. The past week had been particularly cruel. The shelter where they'd been staying had closed unexpectedly for renovations, forcing them back onto the streets at the worst possible time. They'd spent 3 nights huddled in the doorway of an abandoned store, using cardboard and newspapers as makeshift insulation against the biting wind. Maria had given Lily her extra sweater, but it wasn't enough to prevent the little girl from developing a worrying cough that seemed to worsen with each passing day. This morning, Lily sat unusually quiet on their cardboard mat, her usual cheerful energy dampened by exhaustion and illness. Her small frame shook with each cough, the sound echoing off the concrete walls around them. Maria had tried to get her daughter into an emergency clinic yesterday, but without proper documentation and insurance, they'd been turned away with only some basic cough drops and advice to stay warm. "Mom," Lily whispered between coughs, "can we sing our special song? The one about the sunshine?" Her voice was hoarse, but her eyes still held that spark of hope that never failed to break and mend Maria's heart simultaneously. Setting aside her concerns about straining her voice in the cold, Maria began to strum the familiar melody. The morning crowd seemed thinner than usual, perhaps deterred by the weather forecast that had predicted the coldest day of the year. Those who did pass by hurried along with their collars turned up against the wind, few sparing more than a glance at the mother and daughter huddled on their corner. The guitar case remained nearly empty, containing only a handful of coins from their first hour of performing. Maria's voice cracked as she started another song, her throat raw from the cold and from fighting back tears of frustration. She had always prided herself on maintaining a brave face for Lily, but today the weight of their situation felt almost unbearable. Their food supplies had dwindled to a single granola bar, which she was saving for Lily's lunch, and the temperature was expected to drop even further tonight. A particularly harsh gust of wind knocked over their cardboard windbreak, sending their few possessions scattering across the sidewalk. As Maria rushed to gather their things, she noticed Lily's school workbook had fallen into a puddle, its pages now soaked and ruined. It was a small thing perhaps, but it felt like the last straw. Still, she forced herself to keep singing, knowing that stopping meant giving up, and giving up wasn't an option. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and Maria knew she needed to try something different. Settling back into her spot, she closed her eyes and began to sing Amazing Grace, pouring every ounce of her pain, fear, and hope into the familiar words. Her voice, though trembling from cold and emotion, carried a raw authenticity that seemed to cut through the urban noise and winter wind. A few regular passers-by noticed the difference in her performance today. Mrs. Kim paused longer than usual, pressing a warm cup of tea into Maria's hands before hurrying back to her restaurant. John, the young office worker, stopped despite being visibly late for work, his concern evident as he watched Lily cough. He left his lunch bag with them, promising to bring some cold medicine during his break. As the morning wore on, Maria's repertoire shifted to increasingly emotional songs, each one a prayer for help, a cry for someone to notice, to care. She sang songs of perseverance, of hope against impossible odds, of the strength found in desperate times. Her guitar playing might have been hampered by the cold, but her voice carried the weight of their story more powerfully than ever before. Between songs, she tried to keep Lily's spirits up by telling stories about the people passing by, making up little adventures about where they might be going. It was a game they'd played in better times, but today it felt more like a lifeline, a way to stay connected to the world that seemed to be slipping away from them. A group of tourists stopped to film her performance, but Maria barely noticed them. Her focus had narrowed to three essential things: keeping Lily warm, continuing to sing, and praying for some kind of miracle. The cold had settled so deeply into her bones that she could no longer feel her fingertips as they moved across the guitar strings, muscle memory alone guiding them through the familiar patterns. The city continued its endless motion around them, buses hissing past, cars honking, people rushing to and from their warm offices. Maria kept singing, her voice growing hoarser but more determined with each song. She had long since learned that in their situation, giving up wasn't an option, no matter how tempting it might seem. As she started another verse, Lily's cough grew worse, causing her to double over on their makeshift seat. Maria's heart clenched with fear and guilt. A mother should be able to provide better than this, to protect her child from such hardship. Yet here they were, performing on a frozen street corner, their world reduced to the simple but seemingly impossible goal of survival. The next song she chose was one she'd written during their first month on the streets, a melody that spoke of better days ahead and the strength to endure until they arrived. As she sang, she tried to believe in the words herself, to hold on to hope when everything around them seemed to be crumbling. Something had to change, and it had to change soon. They couldn't continue like this much longer. Just then, the sound of an expensive car engine cut through her song, and Maria looked up to see a luxury vehicle slowing down at the red light. Little did she know that this moment, this particular song, would be the turning point they'd been praying for. But for now, she simply kept singing, her voice carrying their story into the cold winter air, waiting for someone to truly hear it. The sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the red light, its engine purring quietly in contrast to the usual rattling buses and trucks. Inside sat Linda Chen, one of the city's most successful music producers, though no one on the street would have known it from her simple, elegant appearance. She was in the middle of an important phone call about her upcoming music festival when something made her pause mid-sentence. It was the voice, raw, pure, and filled with such genuine emotion that it cut through the sealed windows of her luxury car. Linda found herself lowering the phone from her ear, completely forgetting about the call. The woman on the corner was singing Amazing Grace, but not like Linda had ever heard it before. This wasn't a performance, it was a prayer, a plea, a story of real struggle and unwavering hope. "I'll have to call you back," Linda said quickly, ending the call without waiting for a response. She turned up her car's external microphones, a feature she often used to scout street talent, and closed her eyes to listen. The voice was untrained in many ways, yet it possessed something that many professionally trained singers spent years trying to achieve: absolute authenticity. The light turned green, and Linda found herself circling the block, unable to drive away. With each pass, she noticed more details. The one guitar that somehow produced warm, rich tones. The small girl huddled next to the singer, wrapped in what appeared to be multiple layers of clothing. The nearly empty guitar case. The way the singer would check on the child between songs, adjusting a scarf or rubbing small hands to keep them warm. On her third pass, Linda pulled into a nearby parking spot, ignoring the several meetings she was about to miss. 20 years in the music industry had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct was telling her to stay. She sat in her car, watching as the woman interacted with passers-by, noting how she maintained her dignity and grace even in such difficult circumstances. A particularly strong gust of wind carried the sound of the child's cough to Linda's car, and she saw the flash of worry cross the mother's face before she launched into another song. This one was different, an original composition that spoke of dreams that refused to die and hope that burned even in the darkest nights. Linda found herself reaching for her phone, but this time to record the performance. The producer in her noticed the technical aspects, the natural vibrato, the perfect pitch even in the cold, the intuitive understanding of emotional dynamics. But it was the human element that truly captured her attention. The way the singer's voice would soften when checking on her daughter, the genuine smile she managed to give to those few who stopped to listen, the quiet determination that showed in every note. Linda had discovered many talents in her career, But something felt different about this moment. She thought back to her own struggles 20 years ago, before her big break. The nights of uncertainty, the constant pressure to give up on her dreams, the feeling that one wrong step could send everything crumbling down. She recognized that same fight for survival in the woman's voice, but there was something more. A raw talent that couldn't be taught. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, Linda stepped out of her car. The cold air hit her face immediately, making her pull her designer coat tighter around herself. She thought about how the singer and her daughter had been out here for hours, maybe days, in this weather. The thought made her steps more purposeful as she approached their corner. The singing stopped as Linda drew closer, and for a moment there was an awkward silence. The woman pulled her daughter slightly closer, a protective gesture that spoke volumes about their experiences on the street. Linda noticed how the singer positioned herself between her daughter and any potential threat, even a well-dressed woman in expensive clothes. Several other pedestrians had stopped to watch, probably wondering what this clearly wealthy woman was doing approaching a street performer. Linda ignored them all, focusing instead on the way the singer maintained eye contact, showing a quiet dignity that impressed her even more than the voice had. The cold wind whipped around them as Linda stood there, searching for the right words to begin. In her experience, opportunities often appeared in unexpected moments, and genuine talent could be found in the most unlikely places. She had learned to trust her instincts about people just as much as she trusted her ear for music. Looking at the mother and daughter, Linda saw not just another homeless family, but untapped potential and a story that needed to be told. The girl's cough broke the silence, and Linda watched as the mother instinctively pulled her closer, rubbing her back gently. It was this moment of simple maternal love that finally prompted Linda to speak. Around them, the city continued its usual rhythm, cars honking, people rushing past, the distant wail of sirens. But on this corner, time seemed to pause as two women from very different worlds prepared to connect. Linda took a deep breath, knowing that whatever happened next could change not just one life, but many. The singer's fingers remained on her guitar strings, ready to start another song if needed, while her eyes showed a mix of hope and caution. She had clearly learned to be wary of unexpected attention, yet something in Linda's expression made her wait instead of immediately starting to play again. Linda reached into her pocket, not for the spare change the singer might have expected, but for her business card. A simple black card with gold lettering that had opened doors for many artists over the years. Something told her she was about to change lives again, and this time it felt more important than ever. The first few moments of their conversation were awkward, filled with the kind of tension that often exists between people from vastly different worlds. Linda stood there, her expensive boots planted firmly on the cold concrete, while Maria instinctively kept one hand on her guitar and the other protectively near her daughter. The winter wind whipped around them, carrying the sounds of city traffic and hurried footsteps. "Your voice," Linda began, her words forming small clouds in the cold air. "It's extraordinary." She watched as Maria's expression shifted from wariness to cautious curiosity. Years of experience had taught Linda to recognize the look of someone who'd heard too many empty promises, so she continued carefully. "I've been sitting in my car listening for the past hour." Lily's persistent cough broke the moment, and Maria immediately turned to check on her daughter. Linda noticed how she pulled off her own scarf to wrap it around the little girl, leaving her own neck exposed to the bitter cold. It was this simple act of maternal sacrifice that convinced Linda she needed to handle this situation differently than her usual talent scouting. "Let me buy you both a hot drink," Linda suggested, gesturing toward the warm glow of the coffee shop across the street. "It's too cold out here to talk, and I think we have a lot to discuss." She saw the hesitation in Maria's eyes and added softly, "Your daughter's cough sounds like she could use something warm too." Maria glanced between her guitar case, her daughter, and the well-dressed stranger before her. The past 8 months had taught her to be cautious of unexpected kindness, but something about Linda's direct gaze and professional demeanor felt different from the usual mix of pity and temporary generosity she encountered on the streets. "We can watch your things from inside," Linda offered, understanding the unspoken concern. "I'm Linda Chen, by the way. I'm a music producer." She held out her business card, its gold lettering catching the winter sunlight. Maria took it carefully, her cold fingers trembling slightly as she read the prestigious studio name embossed on the card. The coffee shop was warm and inviting, smelling of fresh pastries and brewing coffee. The regular morning customers looked up with varying degrees of curiosity as Linda led Maria and Lily to a quiet corner booth. The barista, who had often snuck Lily hot chocolate, gave them a surprised but friendly smile. "Order anything you'd like," Linda said, watching as both mother and daughter tried to hide their overwhelming hunger at the sight of the display case full of food. When Maria hesitated, ordering only a small tea, Linda took charge and ordered a full breakfast spread: eggs, toast, pastries, hot chocolate for Lily, and coffee for both adults. As they waited for their food, Linda gently began to ask questions. "Tell me about your musical background," she said, noting how Maria's posture straightened slightly at the professional tone. What followed was a story that made Linda's heart ache, even as her producer's instincts tingled with excitement. Maria had graduated from one of the country's top music schools, specializing in vocal performance and music education. She'd been teaching music at a local elementary school, sharing her passion with young minds, while performing at small venues on weekends. Her husband had been her biggest supporter, often filming her performances and encouraging her to pursue bigger dreams. Then came the tragic accident that took her husband's life, leaving her with mounting medical bills and funeral expenses. The insurance company had found a technicality to deny their claim, and the legal battle that followed drained their savings. Within months, she and Lily had lost everything: their home, their security, and nearly their hope. "But not your music," Linda observed softly, watching as Maria's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "You kept singing, even when everything else was gone." The arrival of their food provided a welcome break in the emotional conversation, and Linda noticed how Maria made sure Lily ate first before touching anything herself. As they ate, Linda learned more about their daily life: the struggle to keep Lily in school despite their unstable situation, the constant search for safe places to sleep, the way music had become both their comfort and their means of survival. She watched how Lily's eyes lit up when Maria mentioned their special songs, the ones they'd written together during their first days on the street. "You write your own songs?" Linda asked, her professional interest piqued even further. Maria nodded, explaining how songwriting had become their way of processing their experiences, turning their hardships into something meaningful. Some of her original compositions had begun drawing regular audiences to their corner, people who connected with the raw honesty in her lyrics. The conversation flowed more easily as the hot food and warm drinks helped them all relax. Linda found herself sharing stories from her own early days in the music industry: the struggles, the setbacks, and the one person who took a chance on her when she needed it most. She saw understanding dawn in Maria's eyes as the parallel between their situations became clear. Lily had fallen asleep in the booth, her breathing still raspy but more comfortable in the warm cafe. Maria stroked her daughter's hair absently as she listened to Linda explain how the music industry had changed, how streaming and social media had created new opportunities for authentic voices to be heard. Outside, the city continued its busy pace, but inside their quiet corner of the cafe, something important was taking shape. Linda saw in Maria not just a talented singer, but a woman of extraordinary resilience who had managed to keep her dignity and her daughter's spirit alive through unimaginable hardship. The songs she'd written weren't just music. They were testimonies of survival, hope, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and child. As Linda prepared to make her offer, she chose her words carefully. This wasn't just another business opportunity, it was a chance to change lives. She watched Maria gently tuck the cafe's napkin around Lily like a small blanket, and she knew that whatever happened next needed to address not just Maria's musical talent, but the immediate needs of this small family who had touched her heart. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the coffee shop windows as Linda laid out her proposal. She had spent the past hour making calls, rearranging her schedule, and setting things in motion. Now, as she sat across from Maria and the sleeping Lily, she could feel the weight of the moment. "I want to make you an offer," Linda began, her voice gentle but professional. "But first, I need you both to get some proper rest." She slid a hotel key card across the table. "I've booked a room at the Highland Hotel for the next week. It's just 3 blocks from here." She watched as Maria's eyes widened, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at the key card without touching it. Why? Maria asked quietly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned that kindness often came with hidden costs. Why would you do this for us? Her hand unconsciously tightened around Lily's shoulder, protective even in sleep. Linda leaned forward, her expression sincere. Because 20 years ago, I was living in my car trying to break into this industry. Someone took a chance on me, and it changed my life. She paused, watching as her words sank in. But mostly because you have something rare, a voice that tells the truth and stories that need to be heard. The hotel keycard sat between them like a bridge between two worlds. Maria stared at it, her mind clearly racing with possibilities and doubts. What's the catch? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There's always a catch. The only catch is that I want you to come to my studio tomorrow morning for an audition, Linda replied. A real audition with proper equipment and a warm room. She smiled softly. And maybe some cold medicine for Lily first. As if on cue, Lily stirred in her sleep, coughing. The sound seemed to help Maria make up her mind. With trembling fingers, she reached for the key card, holding it as if it might disappear. An audition, she repeated, testing the word like a foreign language. Linda pulled out her phone and showed Maria the studio's website. This is where you'll come tomorrow. I've booked the main recording room from 9 until noon. She scrolled through pictures of the state-of-the-art facility, watching as Maria's eyes grew wider. We'll record some of your original songs, see how they sound with proper backing. The reality of the situation seemed to hit Maria all at once. But I don't have anything to wear, she started, looking down at her worn clothes. And Lily. I can't leave her alone. Already taken care of, Linda interrupted gently. There's a clothing store next to the hotel. I've arranged for you to pick up some basics. She handed Maria another card, this one a prepaid debit card. And my assistant will be happy to watch Lily in the studio lounge. It has a TV, books, and a comfortable couch. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes, but she blinked them back quickly. Years of hardship had taught her to be wary of dreams that seemed too good to be true. I don't know what to say, she managed. Say you'll be there, Linda responded simply. Say you'll give yourself this chance. She watched as Maria's gaze drifted to Lily, then back to the keycard in her hand. The hotel has room service, she added softly. Order whatever you both need. The cafe had begun to fill with the afternoon crowd, but in their corner, time seemed to stand still. Maria's fingers traced the edges of the keycard as she processed everything. What if, she started, then stopped, gathering courage. What if I'm not good enough? What if my songs aren't what you're looking for? Linda's response was immediate and firm. I've been in this business for 2 decades. I know talent when I hear it. Your voice, your songs, they're real. That's something no amount of studio polish can fake. She leaned back, giving Maria space to process. Besides, you've been performing in the hottest venue there is, the street. The studio will be easy compared to that. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Linda noticed how carefully Maria packed away the remaining pastries and napkins, a habit born from months of not knowing where the next meal would come from. It made her even more certain about her decision. Outside, the winter day had grown colder, but something had changed. Maria stood straighter, holding Lily close as they waited for Linda's driver to take them to the hotel. The guitar case that had been their only source of income now felt like a key to a different future. Get some rest, Linda advised as they parted. Take a hot bath, order dinner, watch TV, just be normal for a night. She saw the emotion flash across Maria's face at the word normal. Tomorrow, we start fresh. As the car pulled away with Maria and Lily inside, Linda watched until it turned the corner. In her mind, she was already planning which producers to call, which session musicians to book, how to help this raw talent bloom without losing its authenticity. But more than that, she was thinking about how sometimes the biggest breaks come from the smallest moments of connection. The sun was setting over the city skyline as Linda finally headed back to her office. She had meetings to reschedule and plans to make, but her mind kept returning to the sound of Maria's voice singing on that cold street corner. Sometimes, she thought, the best music comes from the hardest places, and the truest stories are the ones that almost went unheard. The morning of the audition arrived with a surreal feeling. Maria stood in the hotel bathroom, barely recognizing her reflection in the steam-covered mirror. After a proper night's sleep in a real bed and a hot shower, the first in months, she felt like a different person. The new clothes from the store still had their tags on, waiting to be worn. In the main room, Lily was curled up in the plush hotel bed, her breathing easier after a night in the warm room and the cold medicine Linda had sent up. The room service trays from last night's dinner still sat by the door, evidence that this wasn't just another dream Maria would wake up from. The studio building looked intimidating from the outside, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky. Maria held Lily's hand tightly as they walked through the revolving doors, her guitar case strapped to her back. The security guard smiled warmly, already expecting them, and directed them to the elevator. Linda was waiting in the studio lobby, her presence both reassuring and nerve-wracking. "Ready?" she asked simply, leading them through a maze of corridors. The walls were lined with gold and platinum records, each one representing someone's dream come true. Maria tried not to think about her own picture possibly hanging there someday. The recording room was nothing like Maria had imagined. Warm wood panels covered the walls and sophisticated equipment filled the space, but somehow it felt welcoming rather than overwhelming. The microphone stood in the center, surrounded by acoustic panels, waiting. "Let's start with something you know well," Linda suggested from the control room. "Your street corner song, the one about hope." Her voice came through clearly in the headphones Maria now wore, making everything feel more real. As promised, Linda's assistant had set up a comfortable space for Lily in the lounge next door, visible through a large window. Seeing her daughter settled safely with books and snacks helped Maria relax enough to focus on the music. The first few notes were shaky, her fingers still adjusting to playing in a warm room with properly feeling fingertips. But then something clicked. The sound of her guitar through the studio monitors was crystal clear, every nuance captured perfectly. When she began to sing, her voice filled the space in a way she'd never experienced before. Hours passed like minutes. Linda was an attentive but firm producer, guiding Maria through multiple takes, suggesting small adjustments, but always preserving the raw emotion that had first caught her attention. They recorded 5 songs that first day, 3 originals and 2 covers that Linda thought would showcase Maria's versatility. By late afternoon, they had rough cuts ready to play back. Maria sat in the control room, Lily curled up in her lap as Linda played the recordings. The sound coming through the speakers was both familiar and transformed, her voice, her songs, but polished and enhanced in ways she hadn't thought possible. "This is just the beginning," Linda said, watching Maria's reaction carefully. "We'll bring in some session musicians tomorrow, add some subtle arrangements. But we're keeping your guitar prominent, it's part of your story." She paused the playback and turned to face Maria fully. "Speaking of stories, we need to talk about your contract." The word contract sent a shiver of both excitement and fear through Maria. Linda seemed to sense this and pulled out a thick envelope. "This is your advance," she explained, sliding it across the desk. "Enough to get you and Lily into an apartment with some leftover for necessities." Maria stared at the envelope, her hands trembling as she opened it. The amount written on the check inside was more money than she'd seen in years. I don't know what to say," she whispered, holding Lily closer. "Say you'll keep writing," Linda replied with a smile. "Say you'll let me help you share your music with the world." She pulled out another document, the actual contract. "Take it home, read it carefully. I have a lawyer friend who works with musicians. She's expecting your call to review it with you." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. The advance allowed Maria to secure a small but clean apartment near Lily's old school. The building manager, touched by their story and impressed by Linda's co-signing, gave them a break on the security deposit. Lily's return to her former school was celebrated by her old teachers and classmates. The persistent cough finally cleared up with proper medical care, and her smile grew brighter each day as their new life took shape. The principal, hearing about Maria's background in music education, even offered her a part-time position teaching after-school music classes. The recording sessions continued, with each day bringing new discoveries. Maria's songs began to evolve as she worked with other musicians, but Linda made sure they never lost their essential truth. The stories of their life on the street, of survival and hope, remained at the heart of every track. Word began to spread in the local music scene about the promising new artist Linda Chen was producing. A few local news outlets picked up the story. The homeless mother and daughter, whose music had caught the attention of one of the industry's top producers. Maria found herself doing her first interviews, sharing their journey with a mix of honesty and dignity. The day they finished recording the final track for the album, Linda gathered everyone in the studio for a small celebration. Looking around at the session musicians who had become friends, at Lily doing homework in her usual spot in the corner, at Linda beaming with pride, Maria felt overwhelmed by how much had changed in such a short time. But it was later that evening, as she tucked Lily into her own bed in their new apartment, that the full impact hit her. On the wall hung her guitar, no longer a tool of survival, but an instrument of transformation. Through the window, she could see their old street corner, now just a memory of a chapter in their lives rather than their whole world. "Mom," Lily whispered as she drifted off to sleep, "are we going to be okay now?" Maria looked around their small but cozy apartment, at the stack of schoolbooks on the table, at the demo CD from today's session, at the calendar marked with upcoming performances and recording dates. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied, her voice full of certainty. "We're going to be more than okay." 1 year later, the city streets looked different from the stage of the grand concert hall. Maria stood beneath the spotlights, her trusted guitar in hand, facing a sold-out crowd at her first major benefit concert. The proceeds would go to a new foundation she'd established to help homeless families, especially those with children. The past year had been a whirlwind of changes and achievements. Her debut album, Corner Blessings, had struck a chord with listeners nationwide. The raw honesty of her songs, born from real struggles and genuine hope, connected with people in a way that polished pop music often couldn't. The album had gone gold within 6 months, a rare feat for a debut artist. In the front row, Lily sat proudly between Linda and their new extended family of musicians and friends. At 9 years old now, she had blossomed in their new life. Her school grades were excellent, and she'd started taking piano lessons, showing signs of inheriting her mother's musical talent. But more importantly, she smiled more easily now, the shadows of their difficult past fading with each passing day. "Good evening, everyone," Maria spoke into the microphone, her voice steady and warm. "Thank you all for being here tonight." She looked out at the sea of faces, remembering how different it felt to perform for rushing pedestrians on a cold street corner. "Before we begin, I want to share something with you." She told their story, not the polished version from magazine interviews, but the real, raw truth of those months on the street. She spoke about the cold that seemed to seep into your bones, about trying to keep hope alive when everything seemed hopeless, about the small kindnesses from strangers that helped them survive. "But this concert isn't about my story," she continued, her fingers finding the familiar chords of her guitar. "It's about all the stories out there that still need to be heard. About the mothers and fathers, the children and elderly who are struggling right now on these very streets." The spotlight shifted slightly, illuminating a woman in the third row. Maria had noticed her earlier, someone who reminded her so much of herself a year ago. The woman sat with her young son, both looking somewhat out of place in the elegant concert hall. They had been living in their car for the past month, singing in park for spare change, until one of Maria's foundation volunteers had found them. "Music saved my life," Maria said, her voice carrying through the perfect acoustics of the hall. But it wasn't just the music, it was people who were willing to listen, to really hear not just the songs, but the story behind them. She smiled at Linda, who had tears in her eyes. "Tonight, I want us all to listen together and then act together." The concert that followed was more than just a performance, it was a testament to survival, hope, and the power of human connection. Maria played songs from her album, each one carrying memories of the street corner where they were born. But she also performed new songs, written from the perspective of her current life, about healing, giving back, and the responsibility that comes with second chances. Between songs, she introduced various community leaders and activists who were working to address homelessness in the city. The foundation's plans were ambitious: transitional housing programs, job training initiatives, and special support for families with children. But tonight was already making a difference. By intermission, the donation total had exceeded their goals, and pledges were still coming in. The most powerful moment came near the end of the show. Maria invited the woman from the third row to join her on stage. Nervous but determined, The woman shared her own story of loss and struggle, then sang a song she'd written while living in her car. The raw emotion in her voice silenced the entire hall. "This is why we're here," Maria said after the applause died down. "Because there are so many voices out there waiting to be heard, so many stories that need to be told." She reached out and squeezed the woman's hand. "And starting tomorrow, you'll be recording your own songs in Linda's studio." The surprise on the woman's face, mirrored by her son's excited jump in his seat, reminded Maria of her own shock that day when Linda had stopped at the traffic light. The circle was completing itself, hope passing from one person to another like a torch in the darkness. For the finale, Maria performed Corner Blessings, the song that had caught Linda's attention that cold winter morning. But this time she wasn't alone. The stage filled with a choir of voices, other former homeless individuals who had found their way to better lives, each with their own story of survival and hope. As the last notes faded away, Maria looked out at the audience. She saw tears, smiles, and most importantly, determination in their eyes. The foundation would help many families, but tonight had achieved something equally valuable. It had helped people understand that homelessness wasn't just a statistic or a social issue, but a collection of individual stories, each worthy of attention and help. After the show, in the quiet of her dressing room, Maria hugged Lily close. "Do you remember what you asked me that first night in our new apartment?" she whispered. "About whether we'd be okay." Lily nodded, her eyes bright with understanding beyond her years. "And now we're helping other people be okay too," she said simply. Outside, the city lights twinkled against the night sky. Somewhere out there, on other street corners, more stories were waiting to be heard, more songs waiting to be sung. But tonight, in this moment, Maria knew that their own story had found its perfect ending, not in success or fame, but in the ability to help others find their voice and their way home.